sure that in the 3 years, is it that you've been here, or is it 4? I don't know.
4 years now.
4 years. The semi-lifetime that Dr. Eric Ray has been here. And we also welcome his wife, Lally Ray. Lally came over here as the director of the Centre for Jewish Education. And it was a fortuitous move for the Centre for Jewish Education and Education in this country. It was doubly fortuitous that with Lally came Eric. And I know that many of you have seen Dr. Ray in a number of places already, at conferences, at the Evening Institute, and I'm sure all of you have seen his book. And it's lovely having seen all those wonderful pictures there to actually meet Dr. Ray. The unfortunate thing is that we just couldn't obtain any more copies today because many people wanted them to use the sign. And we do have the Cheder ones upstairs which we use every year. And the problem is most of the parents, when they go home with the children, want to keep the book. And so although we started at with 20, I think we're down to about 10 of those as well. So it's a very popular. I'm sorry that we don't have any to sell tonight. I'm sure as soon as they come back into the country and having heard the talk, everybody will want them because as well as being a book full of interest, it's a book full of beauty. And that really is the job, I suppose, of Dr. Ray, that is creating beauty in the world and to do it and carry out the mitzvah and to do it in a Jewish way has given so many people a thrill. I mean, he's a great enthusiast, and I'm sure we're going to hear. The first part of the evening he's going to talk about the scribe lance generally, and then we'll end look at our scrolls. He's already told me the full story, and the mother-in-law's name of the one who wrote the big scribe, but anyway, welcome Dr. Ray, and thanks for coming.
Thank you for a lovely introduction, Rabbi, and I've had the great pleasure of knowing your Rabbi Goldstein since coming to this country, and I was just reminded that I looked at your scrolls 3 years ago, which of course, since that period, I think I've probably seen somewhere around about 2,000 scrolls. And so it's hard to remember, but I do remember that the fragment, which is here, I did not see before. And there's a certain familiarity to scripts. I like to say hello to those people I've seen before, you know, that are here again. Okay. For those people who didn't hear me before, I'm going to ask those who did hear me before to please be patient and forgive me if I repeat what I already have said that you already know. But basically, a scribe, it's the word sofer in Hebrew, has to do with counting. And so we just went through from Shavuos Lag BaOmer, where we were doing Shraput HaOmer, where we're counting the Omer. And the reason for that was because the scribe's first responsibility, and still is the same, is to produce a scroll which is identical to the one that he copied, and identical to the one that hopefully was in the time of Moses. Now we know that's not really true. We know that in the course of history that we have lost parts of the Sefer Torah. And we know also that at least one of the books, the great majority of that book, was either lost or set aside, and probably set aside, because of the fact that there was a confusion between the one book, which is called the Book of the Wars of the Lord, translated into English, and the book of Yehoshua, the Sefer Yeshua. The Sefer Yeshua was of the conquest of the land, whereas the book of the Wars of the Lord is a prophecy of the conquest of the land. Now you might think that that is the same, but clearly there was a whole different approach in the writing, one being prophetic and on a higher level, and the other being a record of just exactly what was involved in conquering a people. In some cases, the rabbi said, the two are so mixed up together, we can't tell from which book it is. And some of the description of the taking of the cities is so bloodthirsty and so absolutely improper to include as a sacred document, that it had to be set aside. So what they decided to do was that they would take the opening sentence, which was 85 letters, which is that the ark of the Lord is going forward, and exactly that happened, in fact, in battle, so that the ark preceded the army. It was apparently a terrifying religious symbol that was supposed to scare the enemy, and with very good reason, because if the enemy came with metal shields, lightning would come from the ark and go right at their shield. And some people thought in the 18th and 19th century, when they were being involved in the new biblical scholarship, that this was just so much hocus pocus. But by the end of the 19th century, they realized that the construction of the Aron HaKodesh is exactly the same kind of construction where you have a metal which is overlaying a dry wood or some other substance, which will be an accumulator for static electricity. And in fact, it would have an electric charge, which is the reason, of course, that it had to be carried with poles that had wooden handles, because the rest of it was covered with gold. If you touched the gold area, if you touched the ark, it would discharge, and like the man who tried to steady the ark when it was about to topple, he died as a result of that discharge. But clearly it could do exactly that. The bolt of electricity from the static accumulation could in fact go out and scare the enemy. Anyway, no. Mishkafel, those 85 letters have been put into the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And to make sure that you will know that it is a separate book, there is like an inverted column in front and at the beginning and the end of it, which is a nun, the letter nun turned upside down with a 3 tagin on it. We know also that at the end of the book of Numbers there are some additional elements which have been included, and you only know it when you read it because suddenly you get out of context. Something occurs which just has no relationship to what was preceding it, and you're suddenly jumping into something different. But that was what could be taken out of that particular book. In the original period, when these books were written, they were individual books. They were kept separate. And it wasn't until close to the Herodian period that it was decided to sew them together. When I say the Herodian period, I really mean after the destruction of the temple. Because the coins that were minted by Bar Kokhba or by the Maccabees, and the Yahrzeit lights, the glass ones, which had the gold decorations on it, that were found in the catacombs in Rome or found in Israel, all show an ark which had the round design of the end of a scroll being pushed into it. And so you had originally 7 scrolls or 7 books. And the reason for 7 was because the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, originally was 2 books. And when it was joined together with the book of the Word of the Lord, those 3 books became combined together, and there were 5 books. Then the 5 books of Moses, which are much easier to remember because you can count them up on the fingers of your hand. Otherwise, you have to have 7 fingers. And that's because it was an ancient tradition. The same thing to remember the 10 Commandments, and also for Minyan, you know who is in the is going to be part of the Minyan. That was an old approach that numbers and things of importance could, as mnemonics, could be remembered very easily this way. So obviously a simple way to combine to 5. But it was a business of, what if you lose a scroll and it's part of a book and you've got a holiday and you need to go back to it? It's much easier if it's all sewed together. Well, originally, again, it was on one roller only, like a Megillah. And it wasn't until really late in Jewish life, in terms of our history, which was somewhere around about the 7th to the 8th century, the second roller was added. That was in Italy, as a matter of fact. They were smart enough to figure it out. That if you're going to have to roll back, it's much easier to roll with 2 rollers than with 1. But the name for the rollers, Etz Chaim, or the Tree of Life, was given to it by Amiznogdim rabbis in East Europe. So in the time of the Messianic thinking and the problems which the Jews of Russia had with the Chelyabinsk massacres, the rabbis said that this to quote from the Torah, is a tree of life to those that hold on to it, all its paths of peace, etc. So it's Etz Chaim, the whole Torah is an Etz Chaim, but let's talk about the wood. The wood is literally part of this Torah, and therefore it's literally a tree of life. And that's an East European edition. Now we've gone into fragments of history that have got nothing to do with the scribe itself. But the scribe, after all, was the one who was doing the writing, and the scribe was considered to have a very, very low status in the Jewish community. He was the poorest paid of all the people. The rabbis particularly wanted him to be poorly paid because they wanted him to remain humble and not to get above himself. If he got too much money, he might get a nice house, he might get a couple of additional dresses for his wife, put on a few shoes, he might think himself to be superior, and he wouldn't be writing the Torah anymore. Fortunately, in the 20th century, that attitude has changed, and it's been found that, in fact, if you don't pay the scribe, you don't get a scribe. You become a doctor, or a lawyer, or an accountant. Well, the scribes also, in our history, are terribly important to the continuation of the Jewish tradition. Because when we were exiled to Babylon, and there was no temple anymore, no sacrifices anymore, the people who were responsible for running the Ganze Megillah, for the sacrifices, the Korbanot, were the Levi'im and the Kohanim. But they were the fancy ones, right? And some of them would teach, but they were also singers and musicians. It wasn't too difficult for them to find the use of these talents in a civilization of such sophistication as the city of Nineveh and ancient Babylon. And they were scribes, and they could quickly adapt to Aramaic and to writing, and they could also find a position. It was the poor Nebuch, the ordinary Yid, who had a problem. But by being in this great civilization of Babylon, the ordinary Jew, who'd just been a schlepper, someone working out in the fields or doing some kind of a craft, found himself in a position that was quite different to the kind of slavery we had in Egypt, where we were supposed to make bricks out of mud, because they didn't need these kind of ordinary talents of labor. This was a sophisticated civilization. In fact, to go from Nineveh, from Israel, was something like going from, where would you say, the northern hemisphere of Scotland, like John O'Groats, and go from there to New York. And that kind of sophistication, the impact cultural impact is what occurred with our exile to Babylon. What they needed, however, was people who would take bundles and deliver them to different parts of the city, merchandise and so forth. In order to be able to go from one part of the city to another, you had to know the street signs or you get lost. So therefore, the ordinary Yid, who never could read and write, now taught to read and write. And when the ordinary children of Israel could read and write, suddenly the great scribe Ezra said, aha, we are the only ones left now who can teach, because the Levi'im and the Kohanim are busy with their fancy professions, and they've left us all alone, because those priests, as the priests in all the religions, did artwork, and they did music, and they did medicine, they did dentistry, and they did writing, and they were the only ones who had these abilities. And we poor schleppers, the only teachers we have are those who copied the Torah. There were a few Soprim who counted the letters. And so they became the teachers of Israel. And in addition to being the teachers of Israel, the great scribe, the great Sofer Ezra, who became the great teacher of the children of Israel, said, look, you're learning Aramaic. You haven't learned Hebrew letters here. You're learning the Aramaic letters of Babylon, the square form, the Ksav Ashuri, the writings of the Assyrians. And since you didn't know the previous kind of writing, we're now going to have our Torahs written in a script that you can read. So the square Hebrew that we call today was Aramaic. Well, the ancient Babylonian civilization is long gone. We've had that as a letter that we've used for the writing of our Torahs for 2,500 years. I mean, no longer it's Babylonian, it's completely Yiddish. It's our own letter form, and it's the only letter form with which you can write the Sefer Torah. It's still the same law, it hasn't changed since Ezra's time. You don't go back to writing it in the first kind of script, which was, I think I may have something here which will show it to you. which was written at the time of Moses and earlier. This doesn't have it. I thought I had it with me, but I got only the square letters. Well, if I had a blackboard, I'd show you, but no. Sorry about that. Basically, I think that even if I don't have a blackboard, you'll understand that the original design of the Aleph was an actual picture of an ox where these top, like an A turned upside down, where the 2 points up were the horns of the animal. And each of those letters were ciphers or designs that people understood and related to. And to write more quickly, the design was put on the side and crossed over with a sharp line like this, which, as you know, in general writing, if you're writing now in the script of the classroom, you'll just write with it, see, this way, I'll have to do it this way, like that and like that, right? Which is the same thing, only separated away. And the Aramaic was basically that same structure with some parts just removed, but the basic script was the same. And what happens, of course, in English is that we have derived our letters from the Greeks. And the Greeks had turned many of the letters around in the opposite direction. So where we have, in this way, a dalet, it becomes this way a D. Gets switched around. And so sometimes the Greeks had some sounds that were not in Hebrew. They needed to have some additional letters, so they added 4 more letters to the alphabet. So the alphabet changed originally from the 22 to the 26. And the rabbi said, well, you know, this is a wonderful thing, but 26 is a very important number. If you put together Yud He Vav He, the letters of the Tetragrammaton, you come up with 26. So if we add some ending letters to it, that will be the same letter, but at the end of the word will be different, we will add 4. Eventually added 5, but then we'll add 4. It will come up to 26. When they decided to do the last one, they said, all right, we've got the name of Hashem plus one done. Okay. So that we could always rationalize the numbers of the gematria, the relationship of things together. The scribes, of course, were the teachers, and they became the rabbis. The first rabbonim were scribes, and there are many rabbis who are still scribes, and many scribes who are still rabbis. And there are a few like myself who combine one profession with another, and manage still to be scribes. But the job of teaching has continued to some extent. When the scribe is you invited me tonight to talk to you. I become, for a brief moment, a teacher, not just someone who is copying letters. But to go back to what I started with at the very beginning, the whole job of the scribe is to copy so that there will be another copy, another Torah scroll. And that Torah scroll has to have no changes. You're not allowed to even write one letter from memory. Every letter has to be copied from a previous guide, which we'll call a tikkun. And you know the tikkun olam, the mender of the world. Well, that's what a Torah is. And according to Kabbalistic and mystic tradition, the Aleph base was before the world and helped to create the world, and the Torah was given before there were people. Also, we had to eventually earn that right. There's a lot of stories about how we got it. We finally got it. And that Torah has to be retained for door by door, from one generation to another without change. So whatever vicissitudes occurred to the Torah, whatever fragments got lost, the rabbis tried to put it all together again so that it would be as it had been originally. They had a big job because the original, what you might call the copybook, that tikkun from which all the other Torahs were written, was kept in the temple. And so you'd have to go to the temple in Herod's time, you'd have to have the permission to borrow it, to write from it. It was a great excuse to be able to write a Sefer Torah. You had to obviously do it when it was not in the holidays. You couldn't do it on Shabbat. You could only do it on the working days. And you were only allowed to do it in between the services. So you could only write for a maximum of 6 hours. Turned out to be very good because that's just about the amount of time you have good daylight. and if you get right for more than that, you get writer's cramp. So basically, the same law has continued to our own time. Now, originally, there was no attempt to create a style that would be different from one country to the other. And yet, if you go, and you go from one country to another and look at the Sefer Torah, it may be that they are the same words, and they are the same sentences, and they are the same number of columns. But you'll see that letters change quite considerably in the design of the script. And this was never done originally on purpose for someone to say, I'm going to come up with a design that's going to be different to someone else. What happened was that all of the scrolls that were in the Holy Land were burned and destroyed by the Romans, including that famous Tikkun when the temple was destroyed. It was a tremendous and amazing major tragedy to the Jewish people. And it meant that you had to bring in scrolls, Sifrei Torah, Torah scrolls from the different outlying communities that had received the Torah scrolls originally from Israel. And so you would go on a boat and you would take a 6 months or 7 month journey in order to get from Israel to the Black Sea ports of Russia where there were Jewish communities. A longer one to be able to go to the Jewish community in India, or the Jewish community in Africa, in Carthage. It was a little bit closer and easier to cross the Mediterranean and to go to Spain. And you had a very large Jewish community in Egypt, and another very large Jewish community in the Babylonian area, because many of those people didn't come back with the return of the exile. They stayed up in the northern hemisphere in Mesopotamia. And so you had communities in Persia, large communities in Persia, large communities in Iraq, large communities in Syria, and so forth. Morocco, and so forth, throughout those whole areas. And they all had their own Torah scroll. And they would loan a Torah scroll to be sent on the long journey by caravan or by boat to get to Eretz Yisrael for examination by the Rabbonim in Palestine and Judea. And what they found was that the original scroll, which had been written in the Holy Land and had been sent to these communities, was so far away that they couldn't ask for another one when they needed the congregation to expand and they needed more. Their scribes had copied from the scroll. And sometimes they had made mistakes. And sometimes there were changes which were the result of the fact that they didn't have the same kind of material. Instead of being able to write on a very fine quality sheepskin, which was what was the original parchment in Judea, they might have to write on the greasy side of a goat, which was kosher, but it was not very good skin. And the very material itself would start to affect the look of the letter. Also, in the land, the Holy Land, you were writing, if you were living in the majority of Judea, or in Mesopotamia, you're writing with reeds. If you're writing in a mountain country and you don't have any reeds around, what do you write with? Well, you had a mountainous area, which was Jerusalem. And the rabbis had already decided that they could write with feathers in that area. And they found that if they cut the feathers and sharpened the ends into pens of those kosher birds which were brought for sacrifice, in particular pigeons, but later on larger birds like geese and duck and so forth, which we came into, and eventually turkeys, you can get bigger and bigger feathers to write with. And so the very type of material that you're writing with, the edge of the pen, which is cut from a quill, gives you a different stroke and different look to the letter than one which is written with a reed. Also, if you're writing with a reed, which is from Egypt, which was the original form of reed, you'd write with a papyrus reed. And the papyrus reed is this one. That's as big as it gets. You never get any thicker or bigger than this. You want to pass it around. That's from Egypt. And that's the one that was being used at the time when Moses was a boy. However, if you go to China and come up with a nice bamboo like this one, you can really write a big Torah. And some of these letters here are much too big for that papyrus one. Or you can go to Italy, and from a bougainvillea plant, you get a lovely sharp one here, with another nice one to work with. And so in different places, you have different kinds of reeds. This one is from the olive tree, which grew everywhere in the Middle East, and was a favorite, it still is a favorite for Muslim scribes. This has not been cut yet, but it would make a marvelous big one, and that comes from a thistle from Scotland. Nice dried thistle, excellent. This one is a tremendous reed called the Phragmites. It goes throughout the United States, a wonderful reed to write with, and I have written with this one. And you can see that each one will be different. Now, if you are following tradition, which is when you have the estrog or the lulav, and at the end of the holiday of Sukkot, you don't want to throw everything away. I mean, after all, the myrtle was what you used to have. It smelled so good. You used to have them always on the Shabbos table. So the hadass, or the myrtle, you take the leaves and you crush them up and put them in a bowl and use them for Havdalah. But the stem could be cut into a little tiny pen like this one for writing tefillin and mezuzah, very tiny letters, which is still a tradition. So automatically, the kind of tool that you have will make a change. There's also been a change in the kind of ink. The original form of the ink, when we had a temple, was that the very best quality of material or product was sent to the temple only. And so therefore, in Gibeon, for instance, which was a famous town for making wine and also for pressing olive for the menorah, you had two possibilities that could be used for making ink. The skins of the grapes are dried in the sun and then burned as a soot, or the stones of the olive, which have been crushed for the oil, they can also be burned for a soot. If you're using the grape skins, you get a very, very fine powder. If you're using the stones of the olives, it's a bit oily and it's much thicker carbon molecules. And what was done was there was a clay vessel which was made with a long, tall neck, and attached to it was like a bowl with water, and that would cool that neck. And the hot embers were put of the little stones from the olive, the pits were put into the coals at the bottom of this, and the smoke would come up, and it would collect on the sides of the chimney, and that was the basis of the ink, mixed together with some of the wine for the temple, which was sticky and sweet, and some gum arabic, which was a sap from a local plant, a local shrub, that would glue everything onto the surface. If you look at the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll find that that was the ink that was used in temple times. All right, that was fine, except for the fact that, again, you can have temples in other areas. I mean, in Elephantine in Egypt, you had a temple. In Persia, you had a temple. In a sense, it weren't kosher temples. The only real temple was the one in Jerusalem. And they felt this was not really a kosher product for use of ink. So what were they going to do? And they looked around and they saw a miracle occurring in nature. And this is something that we call in English a gall nut. Now, a gall nut is something which was done by a wasp, which is the English name for this particular wasp is called the gall wasp. And it stings plants and trees. And there are excrescences which are grown on oak and olive and so forth, like this. They're called in Hebrew apotzim. It's got nothing to do with the actual ball of the human body. And the wasp does this in order to produce a food for its babies. Once that has grown on the tree, the lady wasp is now pregnant and comes back, uses a stinger to make holes in it and drops her eggs inside. And the little babies, when they're born, are hungry. They wake up with an appetite and they eat their way out. And what's left is the food that the mother has provided, and that's what we use for making ink. It hasn't changed for 2,000 years. That's the only ink we may use for the writing of the Torah today. Because until such time as they have the temple again, and we have the olive for the menorah, and we have the grapes for the temple, everything else is not quite kosher. The olive oil that we have from Israel is nice, and the wine is nice, but it isn't quite as kosher as in the temple, so therefore we're using the other. As it happens, I doubt really whether we're ever going to go back to that temple, and if we did have the temple, we would never go back to that ink, because it's a wonderful ink. And it's stayed good for 2,000 years, you can see by the Torah scrolls here. Now, as to the style that occurred, and which can be seen in different scrolls from different areas of the world, we know that there was a rabbi in Poland who had the most awful rheumatism, arthritis even, or as my friend in Great Notes calls arthritis. Well, this guy has arthritis, and he is bent over like this, and he's got a bit of a crippled hand, so he's writing, and all of his writing, therefore, is on a slant. Naturally, all of the students are going to copy the great master, so all the writing is on a slant. So if you see any writing that has a slant in this direction, you know it's from Poland, because it's directly from the student, the student, the student, the student of this great rabbi. Now you have rabbis who are short, and you have rabbis who are small, you have rabbis who are fat, and rabbis who are thin, and some are very tall like me, and each of them are approaching at a slightly different angle the way they're writing, just automatically. It's harder, for instance, for a short, fat man to keep his pen at 45 degrees. He's got enough here to make him keep his elbow up to help get into a nice 90-degree writing, which happens with the scribes of Germany, all nice roly-poly round scribes, and all of them are writing at 90-degree edge. However, those who come from Germany and go to Poland, they're invited to go there, and they establish a community in Poland. They find sometimes they're a little bit hungry up there. They don't have that, they get to be lean and cavernous looking, and as a result of their thinness, they don't have to necessarily keep the angle exactly like this, and they feel, in any case, to show that there's some kind of a difference, we'll write all the writing at 90 degrees, but for the aleph, which is the number one, for the one God, to say, have a special blessing on Poland, we're going to change it to 45 degrees, just on the aleph. So if you look at the 90 degrees here and 45 at the top, it's Poland. Now, however, there was a period of time, as I said, with the Chelyabinsk massacres, when the people came and they killed so many members of the Jewish community that they had to run out of Russia. They were trying to force Jews out of Russia altogether, into the so-called Pale of Settlement. Some managed to stay. Most of the Khazars were converted to Christianity. Those who stayed alive. Others would go into some community where they could work far away out amongst the peasants, like in the Ukraine. And if they didn't upset the Cossacks too much, they could live. But they were living a terrible life. They were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to be in any profession that would compete with anybody else. So the mensch, how does he make a living? He mends pots and pans. He goes around as an itinerant peddler during the whole of the week. Doesn't get back to his shtetl until Shabbos in order to maybe hopefully bring back a chicken for the Shabbos. So it'll be something different for the children to eat. As a result, the running of the shtetl, generally of the life in the shtetl in those areas, was run by the woman. Any kind of a store, she ran it. She looked after the children. She did the cooking. She did everything. Later on in Poland, we could even we're allowed to get land of our own. So the beginning of the kibbutzim begins with the Jew in the shtetl in Poland who has a piece of land to work on. But in Russia, this was not allowed. Well, in Russia, you've got such a terrible situation going on that the Yidden are praying so fervently for the coming of the Mashiach that it will change and things will be better and the world will be better and the Goyim will learn and everything will be okay and you can make a living and you can get into a guild and you can do something a little bit better, put a little money aside and so forth, have education for your children and so forth. The Mashiach will only come. Not only did they always have someone who was employed to look out for the Mashiach, it was a permanent job because it wasn't paid very much, but he knew he was secure on his salary. But also it affected the writing of the Sefer Torah. How can we bring the Mashiach? How can we bring the coming of the holiness of Hashem into the world to complete this? And we've already received from the great mystics of Spain, like the Abulafia and some of the other great mystics, The idea that not only was a Jew in exile, but Hashem was in exile with us. But if we did certain things, we could make use of mystical powers. So the Sphirot became very important. Of the various worlds which had been created before we got to our own world. What became very important was the Aleph Bet, which had been used after all in the creation of the world. Well, if you just think of the Aleph Bet, if you can think of the right permutation, because one word has a certain number of letters, and if you count them up and it counts with another word which has the same number of letters, obviously there's a relationship between the two of them. So that you can have one which is saying for you good luck, and someone which is saying peace, and you have some relationship, these two together. And so it started to affect the script. What was the first thing to be changed? Was the Aleph. As long as the Yidden of Poland had gone to 45 degrees, let's stay at 45 degrees all the way. Why 45 degrees? Because it had cut through the diagonal of the square. And the world was considered to be square, which had four corners, the Abba Kontat, the four corners, your tzitzis were the four corners to relate to that. And if you put an angle through it, then you have to get round and back again to a shortcut through to the energy of Hashem. Okay, so let's make a letter then which is only 45 degrees, and let's do the center letter like this. It's a Vav on its side. Everyone knows a Vav is number 6. And the top part of the Aleph will do a Yud, which is 10. The bottom part will do another Yud, which is 10, 10, 10, and 6, 26, Hashem's name. Okay, so now we've got the involvement of Hashem directly in the Torah every time we write it out. What else can we do? Well, we can maybe do some special tagin. The rabbis say you need to have 3 tagin on 7 letters. All right, so we'll put a few more dots on it. Bring in this, make it look like a menorah. So we think about the fact that maybe the temple doesn't exist on earth, but it exists up there, and maybe we can bring something down. The Shekinah can be pulled down into the Torah. And so we come up with certain kinds of Torahs which have a Kabbalistic twist. And they automatically, as a result of this, they start to change the shape of some of the letters. Now, what had happened in the period when the Torahs had been brought back to Israel following the destruction of the Sifrei Torah, and the rabbis had looked to see what was going on, they were presented with conundrums. A particularly good conundrum was the word Vayikra. You know that it's Vayikra, and God is speaking to Moses, the beginning of the book of Leviticus. We know that when God is speaking to Abraham, that when Hashem is speaking to all of the people that he is very fond with, that he speaks directly as Vayikra. The only time when he is writing where the Aleph of Vayikra is left off, and it's Vayikar, is when he's talking to Balaam, who we're reading this week, this Shabbos, because we have Balaam and we have Balak, and in this particular area he's supposed to, by the king, to curse us, but Hashem changes and he blesses us, and so he says, how goodly are thy tents, O Israel, Ma tovu elecha Yaakov, mishpanesecha Yisrael. And because of this miraculous and wonderful change that occurs, the rabbis say, well, the beginning of Ma tovu is the Mem, and the Mem is the number 40, and we were 40 years wandering in the desert. And Moses was 40 days up on Mount Sinai and 40 nights up. Very important, we've got to use this to bring in, again, the holiness, the Kedusha into the Torah. So we'll put the beginning of the column, when you're writing, right at the top. Ma tovu begins at the top, won't be anywhere in the middle. It'll start the column up, and it'll start with a large map. To remind ourselves of these miraculous events, and the continuing love of Hashem with his people. We've already got the very beginning, first word, which is starting off the whole book of the Torah, and to let you know that amongst the various scrolls that were scattered around, that the first one is Bereshit, and the word Bereshit starts off with Bereshit, the book of Genesis. Then a large bet is on there to let you know that when you sort them out, that's the one you start off with. You don't start off with Numbers or Leviticus or Exodus, you start off with Genesis, and to identify it, you have a large bet. It also means bet is a house, the house of Hashem. Okay, fits beautifully together. Well, later on, of course, in Europe, it's decided they were going to write the Torah starting with a vav on each column. But you can't change what the rabbi said in Judea years ago. You've got at least some letters which are large, some letters which are different that begin a column to a vav. And you're starting with a bet, and you're ending with a mem. You can read it, we're going to make the end of paragraph, so it'll be easier for you to understand and to read it properly. You can't add another aleph if it's missing. We have some scrolls which have it, but the great majority don't have it. Now, the majority is democracy, in a sense. If the majority is the majority opinion, you have to go according to it. But you can't change Holy Script, so you can't just add in an aleph when you want it. What can you do? The rabbi said, well, the only thing we can do, we'll put a little tiny. And when the Mashiach comes, he'll enlarge it if it's right, and he'll take it out if it's wrong. So it became a requirement that you have to have a little tiny aleph to start off the book of Leviticus with Vayikra. Well, if that kind of logic could occur, couldn't it also occur in other areas? Sure. You have a situation where Pinchas is so full of zeal for the holiness of Hashem and is so upset at the fact that a prince of the Jewish house is adulterating a non-Jewish girl while everybody else is at prayer, and he takes a javelin, thrusts it between them, and kills the two of them. On the one hand, this is marvelous, because it means this is how you ought to be, only be good, don't do bad things, and have respect for Hashem. On the other hand, the rabbi said, oh, praise me. If everybody takes in their head that they're going to go kill somebody when it doesn't fit their ideas without consulting with everybody else, this is really a real problem. It's also in a sense Hilul Hashem. Okay, yet in this section it says that to thank Pinchas for his acts, he's given a brit shalem. Is it a brit shalom or brit shalem? Is it a covenant of peace or is it a complete covenant? In either case, how can you do that when the guy's done this? What we'll do is we'll take the vav in shalom and split it. So that the only vav in the whole of the Torah, it must be written split. So you know it isn't complete peace, and it isn't a brit a complete covenant, nor is it a covenant of peace. But it is really a general covenant that is continuation, that the descendants of Pinchas will be the high priest to continue on in the temple. On the other hand, you know what happens when along comes Korah, and he takes along fire, and he says, takes his incense, and he says, I'm as good as you are, Moses. He gets swallowed up. And what happens is all the people, a plague, as they say in the Hebrew, which means that people get killed for whatever reason, whether it's they're being killed by hail coming down their heads, or falling into the ground with the lava, or they're being killed by an actual plague, or people being upset enough that they'll stick a knife in them, whatever it is, that's a plague. And in order to stop this plague occurring, Aaron comes with his censer and stops the plague. All right. And we read how Pinchas has, in a sense, done the same thing. The plague had started because of this naughty prince, but Pinchas' act stops the plague. All right. He is just a little plainer Yid, but he has saved the Jewish people. So when we write the word Pinchas, the Yud, which is a Yid, is to be made very small to remind you that even our little Yid can save the people. So you have different kinds of writing which is required by the Rebbeinu, and that's the way you write the Sefer Torah. There's certain things that have to be done. Ezra said there are some things which are puzzlements, like the king of Siam. He says, the thing is a puzzlement. He says, you can't quite understand what is the exact meaning, and perhaps it needs a different emphasis. And so that if you're not quite sure, maybe we'll put some dots over the letters just to leave the whole question open until such time as the Mashiach comes. So we have some letters that have dots over them. And there's half a dozen different interpretations as to why they're put there, but everyone has agreed it was Ezra who ordered it. He got the blame for doing it. All right, if you can make these kinds of changes, then you can also do some changes whether the rabbis agree or not. So then, the ayin, I know that's not the way you read Ein Sof. You would write with an aleph. But ayin is also an eye, the eternal eye of Hashem looking at you, and it's related to the Ein Sof, which is the endless, the eternal Hashem. It's considered one of the great letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So therefore, in certain areas, when you want the Mashiach to come, the ayin, the top of the ayin, is to go way high above the rest of the writing. It doesn't change the writing all that much. After all, the rabbis have said that when you do the Shema, you're going to do a large ayin at the end of one, and Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, a large dalet at the end, so that when you read the large ayin and the large dalet of Echad, you read the two together as 8, that when you're saying that there is one God, you are a witness to the world, to the fact that there is only one God in this world. And since you can do that in the Shema, why can't you do that for Kabbalistic reasons? Because sometimes you come across a Torah which has some changes like this, and they make the slight changes in it. It's, in a sense, it gave a reason, a right, for the people who wanted to make some stylistic changes in the letters. And that's all that was needed for a country like Czechoslovakia. See, in the Middle Ages, at the end of the Middle Ages, the 17th century, there were two countries that were far above in culture and in money the rest of the Jewish community. The one was in Holland, and the other was in Czechoslovakia. In both of those cases, you had painters, who were great illustrators and could even do paintings. In some cases, even rabbis said to have their portraits cut in stone. Can you think of something like that? Not a pestle, not an idol, but it's not a graven image. It's something which was acceptable in these sophisticated communities. Well, since the Czechoslovakian community felt and knew, in fact, that they were better than anybody else, they got to have something to show them. So when they write the Aleph, the top of the Aleph is pointing up to Hashem. It's above the line to show that they're better than any place else. And it's only in Czechoslovakia that you see this movement above the line. Now, a scribe may come from another country and come to write in Czechoslovakia. And so therefore you sometimes see Polish elements in the letter forms. And all of a sudden you see, although it's a Polish letter, the Aleph is above. And you know that he's either following a Czechoslovakian custom, which requires him to do this, or else he was trained in Poland by a Polish scribe. Now, I have had some problem with my stomach, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take a brief break and I'll come back again and we'll look at the Torahs. It's been troubling me all day, so if you don't mind, I'll just go out for a minute and I will be back.
You want a cup of tea or something?
No. If you don't show all of the other two columns, that's still acceptable, as long as you're showing that part of the columns are flanking and that one column is in the center. The other thing is a lot of people don't realize that when you have Galila and you have to wrap it together, that you should change the roll so that the seam is in the center. So if it is going to split, it'll split along the lines where the sewing is and not in the other area. And I often feel that nobody should be given the mitzvah of Hagbah unless they first have a little training with it. Because more Torahs are damaged by the wrong kind of a Hagbah than anything else that occurs. And it's a very simple situation when you consider that that is the length of the Etz Chaim. And if you just pull the Torah down so that 1/3 of it is on the edge, and you keep the parchment taut, if you bend it on that, you can even go to halfway if you like, but at least it's got to be at least 1/3 in order to get the leverage. You can lever it up and get it up, and even a relatively weak person can do a Haggah and hold down the Torah. If you don't have the parchment tight, then the weight of the Torah is on each wrist without any help from the other, and that's when you get twists and it turns and you get letters which pop off from the parchment. Anyway.
We were in Northern Rest.
Yes.
They were actually, the boy's name in Hebrew is the same, Hayim.
Yes.
And he was doing the mitzvah. And the rabbi there actually said that in their community they used to have a special book that people had to study pass an examination before they were allowed to live.
I think that's a great idea.
We read from this 1930 book, and the detail in which it went was quite impressive.
Quite impressive, yes.
So I just add that.
Yes, and also, however, in many Sephardic shuls, you know that the Sephardic Torah is in a case. Sometimes it's wood, or it's wood covered with silver, sometimes it's just straight silver. But it's because it's not written on the same material as the Ashkenazic Torah. The Ashkenazic Torahs are written on the skins of domestic animals that are in our herds, like a sheep or a bull, or sometimes a goat, but generally these are the two main animals. The writing for the Sephardic or the Mizrahi Torahs are written on leather, and that is a leather skin of antelope and deer, because in those areas of the world, like Morocco and Algiers and so forth, they didn't have any bulls, not too many sheep, but they had tame deer, which was their food supply. Now you couldn't go out and hunt a deer because then it's no longer kosher, but if you are slaughtering it, according to Shkita, according to the laws of ritual slaughtering, and it's a kosher animal, to make a difference what it is, you may use it. So therefore I have amongst my parchments one from a springbok from Africa, which is being produced by Rabbi Borscht here in London. The reason for it being that here in this country, and in many countries, including Australia, they're now giving additives, chemical additives in the feed to the herds, and it's destroying the skin. So the fibers of the skin are splitting, and if you try to stretch the skin when it's wet and after it's been scraped, it'll tear apart. You won't be able to have a full sheet to use for a Torah. So therefore you have to have free-range animals, like in New Zealand, or to get the wilder ones that are on at least a diet that doesn't have these other additives in it, which are, of course, the traditional ones of the Maghreb area of Mesopotamia. Now, because it's leather, and leather is much softer than parchment, and insects can easily chew at them, they have to be protected, you see. So that's where the cases came from. As long as you put it in a case, you make it beautiful, you decorate it with silver, etc. So therefore, in this kind of a case, many of the Mizrahi, that is, the Jews of the East who never went to Spain, and those who were Sephardim who went from Spain and eventually came to the India, to other areas of the East, will have the Torah in such a case, and it's opened up and held like this as you carry it around in the procession. You don't carry it on your shoulder like we do, and you don't have a regular hugbah either. You just hold it for the hugbah for everybody to see, like this, and then it is closed. So in some cases, however, you have a Eastern and Western combination, like in Holland, where some of the Sephardic communities had Torah scrolls made of leather, but they would take the Torah scroll out of the case and read it flat on a desk, and it's just a little tiny spindle. It can hardly hold the end of it, but with that they would hold it up as a hugbah. It's not designed for it, obviously. Ours are, the Etz Chaim of the Ashkenazic Torah are designed specifically for it. By the way, thank you for your patience while I went away. I appreciate that. The original number of lines to a column in the Torah, which was kept in the temple, was 42 lines. And there have a lot of speculations as to what it is, whether it was the 40 days, the 40 years in the wilderness, and the 2 luchat which we received, the 2 tablets which we received, and that's the 42. But for whatever interpretation the rabbis could make of it, in any case, with 42 lines, you wind up with 248 columns. And since you're supposed to read a Torah every day of the year, 365 days, if you add the 248 to the 365, you come up to 613, which are the mitzvot which are in the Torah. That was, and the size of it, 42 lines, meant that the Torah was relatively small. The parchment was on average around about 24 inches or 26 inches of height. which was the size exactly of the Sefer Torah which the Rambam, which Maimonides wrote for himself. But what happened was that because of the desire to bring the Mashiach, to change the miserable conditions of life in Europe, the Kabbalah took an increasingly important part in the writing of the Torah. And of course you had the false messiahs coming along, who claimed to be messiahs and weren't. But in order to do that, it was found that maybe there were numbers which had importance in the Torah that could be applied to the number of lines that you have. So to change from 42 to 48 was no big deal, because there were the number of events which occurred to the Jewish people in the wandering. However, if you wanted to also next to 72 lines, because there were 72 elders and you did 72 lines, now you start to have to go away from the irregular ordinary bull and go to an ox. We have to have a big size sheep. Well, then you can go to maybe not so much as that, maybe 60, because it was 60 million, 600,000 Jews who were there at Mount Sinai. That's a very important number. But a lot of people did that. Then there were 52. Why? 52 weeks of the year that you studied Torah. And so it goes on, and then sometimes you got to the point where you had 97 and so forth, each of them having mystical reasons. But at this point, the Torahs were getting so large, the rabbis were saying, now come on. We now have better medicine than we ever had before. And thanks to our nice Yiddish doctors, you're living longer. And besides which, the Boychikos that only studied Talmud are now studying Torah. They're going to have to lift the Torah for themselves. You need a smaller Torah, a Torah that they can use. The most popular thing, of course, was the one which was a tikkun that the scribe wrote for himself. It's a nice small one that he could copy for the rest of his large Torahs. But the rabbi said, no, it's enough already. Only a few of those exist. You happen to have one where somebody here wrote that for his son. And you're very fortunate to have that kind of acclaiming Torah here, a small one, because there are very few of them around. So the rabbi said, from now on, all scribes are going to write to 42 lines. Well, they decided that in the year 1800. But before they could get the scribes to agree all over the world, it was 1850. And it was right the whole business of this Arab problem that we had in Jerusalem, where the stones are being thrown at us because the Muslims are afraid that we're going to build a temple all of a sudden. They don't know anything about Jewish life. They knew Jewish life, they knew that it'd take 100 years before we decide who the caterer is. And besides which, in the 20th century, you have to have 2 temples, one for the vegetarians. They shouldn't be so worried about it. But in any case, what happened was that the rabbi said, all right, from 1850, that's it. And so if you see a Torah which has more than 42 lines, then it was written before 1850. Doesn't mean to say that because you find the Torah was 42 lines, that it is later than that. I came across a wonderful Torah, which happens to be in The Hague, in Holland, which has a number of different sections which were written by different scribes. But if you unroll it, you find that there are about 17 or 18 portions that were written by the original scribe that's still good. The ink has turned a beautiful gingery orange, just like the red hair of the Kohen. And that's what happens when you use the gold. You don't mix it with soot or anything else. It's nice and pure, and it's good ink. It'll eventually turn this beautiful brown and stay there, won't change, won't fade, it'll be good. This one is written to 42 lines, because already back in that time, which was in the 1300s, before the dispersion, which was in 1492, or they were writing to the same size as the Torah which was kept in the temple, if only because they followed the Rambam. Right, now we have these lovely scrolls of yours, and the best thing is, I suppose, I'm going to talk about the materials, but really, time is getting on. I think it would be nice if we all came to look at the Torahs themselves. And so I'm going to just stick this stuff on the side for the moment. And I think what we'll do is we'll take one at a time down, and then you'll come around and look at it. And from what I was telling you about the scripts, maybe this will be something that you can see for yourselves. And I'm going to start with the Torah fragment. It's clear when I looked at these scrolls that all except for the small one I've checked the back in. Yeah, that's the next thing I need. And what I'd like you to do is to come around the table and look at the Torah. Notice it's in a terrible shape. Because what has happened to it in the history. But if you would do me a favor, we'll count the lines of this column and see where it wound up with, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. That's your average size. 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. Did I count it right? I know. That's 55. And you go figure out why 55. I can give you, of course, a very good, simple answer, that there are 50 books of wisdom, which remind you of the Yovel, the Jubilee year, and there are 5 books of Moses, and perhaps these two are combined together. I don't know. But it's a possibility. Or you can say that you're studying the Torah for 52 weeks of the year, and there are 3 kinds of Jews. That's a Cohen, the Levi, and the Yisrael. I mean, you can figure out. I don't really know why this is. I do know in some cases. However, if you look, you'll see, let's take an Aleph, and look at this Aleph. You see the top of it is above the line. You can see in every case that there's a line that has been written, inscribed in. You can still see it, and it's above the line, pointing up to Hashem to show that this is one of the superior people of the Czechoslovak in Yidden. And there are other letters which are a clue, but you'll see that this one is also coming in this direction. You see, the slant is not going this way, but it's going this way. What does that tell you? It tells you that this particular scribe is used to writing European writing, which is going in this direction, not Hebrew as a general rule. And also, by the flow of the ink, you can see that the flow is coming like this, up, heavy at the bottom, going light, right? Heavy, going light. This is a left-handed scribe. I can't tell you how tall he was, nor how old he is, but I can tell you that he was, by the fact that it's a 65-degree slant, and not 90 like you would have in Germany, nor 45 like you have in Poland, that this is a man that's been influenced by the Sephardim. And so therefore, most likely, this particular scribe came from a country where there were Sephardim, like in Bulgaria or Romania. Now, your regular kind of a pay, let's see if we can find, there, regular kind of pay, got a nice thick inside, right? And you can see that it's larger than the rest of the writing. It goes down below. Yeah, don't touch the letters. Okay. The reason is because you have to study Torah Baal Peh. You have to actually read it to study, read it out loud. But if you come and look in here, you'll see somewhere, I noticed there was a Kabbalistic Peh. Here, right here. You see it's almost faded away, but there's a little circle inside of the Sefirot. This is a Kabbalistic scholar that is writing this in order to make it work. Now what happens is that the question is, how come you have such a wide column? If you write the Mishpachatem, which is 10 letters, and you write it 3 times, you come to 30 letters. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. He's crammed them together. He's got 35. But generally speaking, a regular square letter, some of the regular ones like this, would make it to 30. And that is your base width that you go by. But look at this one. That's much, much wider. And I can only presume that this was done, first of all, the rabbis haven't yet codified down to 42 lines at this point, but also it was done because he had a piece of parchment and he was trying to fill the parchment out. What was required is that you have to have a minimum of 2 fingers, preferably 3 in width, which is the border at the top, 2 fingers in between, and 3 or 4 at the bottom. That is required. Okay? It doesn't tell you anything other than the Mishpachatem is your basic, that's the longest word in the Torah, to be repeated 3 times. Because it didn't get codified. It was originally, but it got lost. And the rabbis reinterpreted it again in the 1850s. Now, the sewing from 1850, actually going back to 200 years ago, is we decided that the sewing was getting to be kind of ugly. If you could do blind stitching, where you could turn one end over and put the other back and you stitch behind it, you won't see the stitching at all. But if you see stitching like this, which is across from the front, that hasn't been done for 200 years. Now, it takes you at least 100 years, generally 150 years, for black ink to turn brown. And if the brown is becoming gingery like this, you know it's got to take at least 200 years, maybe 300 years. And so you have a very old Torah scroll here that I would estimate certainly is more than 200 and maybe 300 now. This is 1991, 1891, 1691. End of the 17th century. And this is, of course, the time when Jews are coming to England under Cromwell. And so that's how old this particular Torah is.
And some of the repairs, if you turn on a bit, you'll see, in fact, there's quite a lot of repairs.
Oh, that happens with a course of history that has, in here you see there was a repair that had been glued in from the back. Here's another part that was cut out and repaired. And this has been done very recently, you see, recently, in the last 50 years. And you see it's very black writing, and also it's a different script. There's a different scribe that did this. He tried to match the script. Not always scribes do, but in this particular case he did. And so you have a very recent piece of parchment which has been glued on the back, and since we know that this was destroyed in the Holocaust, this patch must have been added in before World War II, because there'd been no Torahs written since the time of the Nazis in the Sudetenland. So we know that that's more than 75 years ago, isn't it? To go back to before the war and to this particular time when you were writing. So that's when that addition was added in. And so, as I said, 50, it's got to be more than 50.
Why would that need correcting? Because it was rubbing out? Because the letter, because the word was not...
It could have been that there was something wrong with this. Maybe somebody had spilt something on there. Or what sometimes happens is that you sometimes see an orangey kind of a fungus growing on a Torah, little spots of orange. And unless you know it, you don't know it's fungus, but that's what it is. It's from saliva. And it is from the Baal Koreh who didn't do what is required, which is to rinse his mouth with wine before he reads. I suppose they don't want the Torah to be sugar, so they didn't insist on that. But it was the way the alcohol cleaned the mouth. Or it could be that someone, not the Baal Koreh, I'm saying something bad about him, someone who came up with him to get an aliyah. He hadn't brushed his teeth in the morning yet, and he's the one with a bit of a spitter, and so whatever, the scribe is preparing to scrapes it away and makes a hole in it. You can't make a little hole, especially in this particular case of an Aleph Lamed, which is like Eloheinu. It's a very important letter, even if it's only meaning something else entirely. And so therefore, you couldn't cut out Yud Hei Vav Hei, the Hashem's name, but you could cut out that God is speaking to somebody, and so therefore this was cut out and the whole thing rewritten.
Later on there's a whole sentence, fairly...
Here's another one, but this is done at an early period, it's already turning brown. So here's a number of them, you see?
Yeah. All the way through.
All the way through.
I opened it out and there's whole sentences.
Now the 3 tagina that I was talking about, these 3 points, which have to be on 7 of the letters, with a Zion, a Gimel, Nun, a Tet, Shin, and iron and so forth. And each of these had 3 tagim. Sometimes the Kabbalistic Torah scribe would put all kinds of fancy decoration on it. Now, I don't see it here, but let me just show you in this Megillah. It's very pretty, and especially if it was made to look like a menorah, and we had a certain number, like 7, for instance, or 17, which reads as Tav, or 18, which is Chai, and so forth. Now, you can do this on a Megillah because the name of Hashem is not in this scroll. And so you can decorate it in all kinds of ways. But if you decorate it with illuminations or with colors or with pictures, you can't read it in the congregation. But you can read it yourself, but it can't be read for the public. It has to be like the Torah with no decorations, except in the case of the Tagim, the rabbis allowed that. So if this was read in the congregation, and in order to read it, would you take one end of it, please? In order to read a Megillah, you have to first open it all the way and then close it. The reason is because if you open it all the way, you come to a Kabbalistic fact of great interest, which is that the sons of Haman are written large here, and they're written that way because, you know, in Pesach, when you are spilling out some of the wine, so you won't rejoice at the suffering of others, you say the names of the sons all in one breath without stopping, so as not to emphasize that even though they were enemies of Israel, we still won't emphasize that fact. However, because our prophets looked ahead in the future, you see that in here there are little tiny letters, like a taf here, small taf, you see, and down here a little Zion. If you count the numbers up, it's the numbers of the year of the Nuremberg trials, which is rather interesting. Our rabbis were great prophets.
Do you know how old that?
I'll look at it when I get it back again. It's not a young one, you can see, but I can tell you that it has blind stitching that we were talking about. If we look at the back of it, it's the same kind of sewing as you have on the Torah, but with it stitched in the back so you can't see the stitching from the front. So therefore you know that this kind of stitching was done since 200 years. The ink is fairly black, and it takes at least 100 years or 150 years to turn brown, so it's less than 150 years. Okay, then the writing is done so that if you look at it, it's angles in this direction. And who do you know that was writing on this angle but comes from Poland, right? So one of these students, or the student of the student of the student, is writing with a slant. It only came from Poland, this forward slant. You see the slant? It's not straight, but it's like that. You can see the Nun Sofit gives you a good example. And so therefore, the next thing to see is look at the Aleph. Does the Aleph have 90 degrees like the rest of this and change to, yes, it changes to 45 here and 90 there? It's Poland. What part of Poland? Well, then you have to look and see other letters. The Gimel, which has a very nice clean sweep to it. And the Mem, does it go below the surface? There's a Mem? No, it doesn't. Okay, then this comes from Lithuania. If it goes below the surface, then it's not from Lithuania. So this is probably written in Vilna, or in one of the great academic towns of Jewish study in Lithuania. So it's a Litvak scribe who wouldn't marry like a Litziana, and it is certainly over 100 years old, but just about that. So probably change of the century between the 1890s and the beginning of the 20th century is when this was written. You got it?
Yeah, got it.
It's his Megillah, that's why it's interesting.
It's your Megillah. Okay. How did you get this?
Well, it's my maternal father's, my maternal
And where did he
grandfather's.
come from?
I don't know. I mean, it's just sort of been in the family. And
Do you know where your family came from?
well, my grandfather came from Russia.
From Russia,
Yes.
via Lithuania. Okay, and that's this one. Let's look at the other Megillah on the top.
Lithuania. That's very interesting.
This is already starting to turn brown. We haven't even looked at stitching yet. It looks like the stitching is blind stitching. But a bit of the stitching is showing in the front. Okay, so this is not, it's after 200 years, but it's still over 150 years, this one. I'm looking at it upside down, but you can see that, okay. What else can we see? Looking at it the correct way. 90 degrees till we come to the aleph. Look what happens to the aleph. It is written on an angle, and the rest of it's written at 90. See this part of the aleph here? You can point it out to somebody. Where can we find a nice aleph up? Here. Okay? And you can see that look at another aleph here. And the angle is different. So you have the aleph, you see this is 90, and that's 90, but it's above the line, right? So you have, this is a German scribe, or Bavarian scribe, who is writing in Czechoslovakia, or for the Czechoslovakians. I doubt whether a German scribe would ever write with an aleph going above the line in Germany. He would have to have been someone who probably was in what we call the Sudetenland, and that would have been Bohemia. So probably written in Prague. I don't know where that came from either, but I mean in terms of how it came here.
It was bought in an antique shop. So we saw it, remember the congregation, saw it in this tin. Leslie Brooks saw it in an antique shop.
Now this is, is what was done very often in World War I, and that is the shell case. And that was cut down.
That's just tin, that's not a shell.
No, it was the tapers for the shell, not the actual shell itself, that we use for firing the guns. Some of them are actually the polished copper of the old one, but that's, and was probably painted originally the same color, the khaki or whatever it was, green was a requirement. Okay, so there's this one. And you can see how it has been written many years later. So the blackness of the ink is probably not more than 70 years old. But look at the bottom of the het. You see it comes around like this. And you don't see this with a regular het like that. So that again is Kabbalistic. And it's only gone on certain kinds of letters to emphasize the bringing of the Shekhinah. This is obviously the gall ink, and it's a pure gall ink with no admixture, because it's turning a nice brown with no problem at all. Nicely written tape also. Now let's see another Torah. Maybe if you can all come up with the same, if you think about that one. Tell me how old it is? Got any idea? Oh, could you pass the yard from below the point? Look at another one over here. Okay, good.
The ink's very black.
Right. Do you want to use to point anything out? Yeah?
I've just counted the lines.
You counted the lines. How many
Well,
lines?
there's more than 42.
There's more than 42. 54. Okay? Got any idea why? There's always a Kabbalistic reason, but I don't need either.
2 weeks to study it and 2 hours to do the Torah with you.
Okay, that's good. Very good. Very good. Now we talked about the Shema. Here's the Ayin Lad and the Dalet Lad in the Shema, which reads together as aid, as witness. This is, of course, the 10 Commandments in here. So you're not to steal, you're not to do this, that, and the other. Okay. Sometimes you start with Anochi Ad Hashem here, with a large aleph. I am the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, and so forth. And that sometimes is large. In this particular case it isn't, but it is slanting again in this direction, not straight. So what country is it from? Man was trained in Poland anyway. Now what about the aleph? Did you look at the aleph to see what happened to the aleph?
It's above the line.
Okay, it's above the line, right? And this is 90, and that's 45. Let's see if that's same. Not always true in every case. Sometimes the scribe is not consistent.
One very close by.
Yeah, okay, this is definitely above. Now this is not 45, so that's 90. So that's interesting because you have 90, 90, 90, which is the German approach. and yet you've got it above the line, which is the Czechoslovakian approach, and you have it angle, which is a Polish approach. So what does it tell you? It tells you either he's a traveler, or that he was trained, most likely he was trained in another country and came to Czechoslovakia and only added that above the line for Czechoslovakia, which happens with a lot of scribes, but that he probably had a German and Polish relationship, which would have been Silesia, the country of Silesia, or Prussia. Most likely Silesia, because there are far more Jews in Silesia than there were in Prussia. So I would make that as a pretty good bet. Now, you know from the stitching that this is more than 200 years old. But look at the color of the ink. It's black. It's not brown. That tells me that this man was in a hurry when he made the ink. He couldn't wait the whole year, which is supposed to allow the ink to mature, to turn to a proper black, and he added soot into it to blacken it fast. As a result, you'll see that a lot of this is fading out and breaking off in the center because of the soot which is in the ink. And it hasn't turned the brown. It turned the brown underneath. You see, when the soot's coming off, you can see the brown underneath. You see? But the soot in it is keeping it black. That's another indication, therefore, that it's probably a Chassid that was doing this, because the Chassidim were and still are always in a hurry. And
How long would it have taken him to write the whole?
in order to write a Torah like this one, remember, with this size of letters, this skin, which incidentally is a very fine, beautifully fine quality, which would be called in Hebrew doxostos, that is a vellum. It's not the parchment, it's where a skin has been split and you get two skins for the price of one, and it's much finer. It's what we call vellum parchment. This was from an ox, size of an ox. What was the question?
How long would it have taken to write the whole
this
thing?
size would have taken him obviously much longer than your average Torah. Now your average Torah, which has 42 lines and has 248 columns, figure that for 42 lines it takes a fast scribe 4 days to write one column. 4 days times 248. And you know the number of days that is?
It's about 3 or 4 years.
And you're only allowed to write 300 days of the year because the rest are Shabbats and holidays. So you've got 3.5 to 3.5
4 years.
4 years in writing. And that's for your average size. This one is much bigger. But bear in mind that the average scribe is not writing the Torah all day long. That's only if you are writing every day, you take no vacation, and you're not sick, except on Shabbats or holidays, and you write a full 6 hours a day, or maybe a little bit more, and that's it. Well, okay. But if you are like your average scribe, you're writing tefillin and mezuzot and ketubot, marriage contracts, and gittin. Fortunately, not too many of those for divorces. And you're obviously also going to be writing Megillot for the Book of Esther, and you're going to be writing Eicha for the Book of Lamentations, which was needed, and you're also going to be writing Haggadot for Pesach. So you're going to be pretty busy.
Did you make up your ink yourself?
Oh, you have to do your own parchment, make your own. This was not turned on a lathe. They were all cut by hand.
Very
And
old
so
was
the
the
handles
scroll.
themselves, the Etz Chaim, are themselves over 150 years old. Also, the kind of wood is quite different. This is not oak or ash. I think it's a beech wood, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, it's a hardwood. Now we have to get the binder, and then we'll look at another one. Maybe I'll just bring this back over there, excuse me. And I'll come back. If you wouldn't mind being kind enough to bang it. So I'll give you the next one. And we'll take it next one. Just take this. You wouldn't mind putting it on the table, hanging on the back. Right, now, well, let's look at the Aleph again. This is straight up, 9 degrees. That is 45, but it's above the line. So in each case, written in Czechoslovakia, but this is a It's a Polish scribe. However, it is written with a pull down and twist to the pen, which the others don't have. And this is a classic form of what we would be called the Beit Yaakov. There are various kinds of script. One which follows the Ari, the great Sephardic Kabbalistic scribe, and it's called Beit Ari, and one which is called Beit Yaakov. And Yaakov happens to be because of the three fathers of Israel. The first father of Israel discovers Hashem on a mountain. And if you look at a mountain, I mean, it's no difficulty to look at a mountain because it's not made by man and see Hashem has made it. In the second one, Yitzchak, he discovers Hashem in a field, and that's a combination of man's work and of Hashem together. Maybe a bit more difficult to see God in, but it's there. But Yaakov discovered God in a house. And there you have to strain in order to see beyond the accomplishment of man, above the vanity and the ego of man. So therefore it's a greater mitzvah to see Hashem studying in a shul than it is to study outside and be distracted by trees and so forth. And so therefore the Beit Yaakov was given a particular quality to that, and it was given a name for someone who studied in the synagogue. However, the kaf here is done staccato, it's not rounded. And the reish is done staccato, and the kuf is done staccato. And this is, again, a Czechoslovakian quality. So this is a scribe who has lived the majority of his life in Czechoslovakia, and may indeed have been a Czechoslovakian scribe that was trained by a scribe who came from Poland. But he would have been a Miznagid, not a Chassid. He would have been someone who was very careful. There's nothing Kabbalistic in this. This is all exactly as it should be. The Lamed is stretched up, yes, because of the word lomeid or lilmod, to study and to learn, and it's pointing up to Hashem. So it's a very lovely Torah, and again, this has been written by a master scribe, but it has, at first sight, the look of writing with its slanty going this way, and with the angle going in the Polish. But as you see, the shaping of the letters, which is the square form that was, in addition to the aleph going up above, which only occurred, incidentally, in Czechoslovakia, it's almost certain that this was a master scribe who was trained by a Polish scribe. He himself was not Polish, and he was writing in Czechoslovakia. But the stitching is 200 years old, and the ink is turning brown a little bit, but it's still mostly black. And again, we can see from some of this is dirt from the broken letters coming out in it, that this was soot in the ink.
How did they put the lines on?
The lines are done with what's called a sargel, or a thorn, which is pressed in. You're not allowed to use a pencil, but if you press it down this way and press it on the side, you can have your width. Now look how even and neat and nice these columns are.
The other one didn't have the lines ruled on them.
It did, but over the years it gets lost.
This always strikes me as the most beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's
all
written
the way through. It's very even.
It's written by, as I say, a real scholar, a Talmud Chacham, the old school, not a Chassid, and written with great, and not only dignity, but great commitment and love. That's by a master scribe, where every letter is like marching soldiers. They're beautiful, one after the other.
The page an unusual shape.
I noticed that page there.
Yeah, this particular page, again,
Yes.
that comes out of Poland, and if you get a minute, I'll just write you some of the page. Just get a piece of paper. We'll need to get this wrapped back up again, so let me take this. Oh, you're going to do it? Would you put it underneath? Tighten it up. Well, I tighten the parchment and put it together. Right, if you wouldn't put that over on. And the Torah, the little one that you know, I just want to get a piece of paper and well, only by scribes and by appointment. See, it has Leo the Sofer, the ink of the sofa. It's the only ink which is allowed for us to use.
Must be at least 200 years. Was it orange or red?
Springbok.
Oh, we share with those South African scrolls.
Here it's showing you the lines pressed in.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Elkins.
How did they get them
I
so
fancy
straight?
all those South
What
Africans.
method
makes a
did
good
they get them
bolt
on so straight?
You'd use a
Once you
ruler.
head the bolt on,
Yeah,
Literally.
and this is an English stone, obviously a rose, but you can use all kinds of.
Hanging up upside.
Where I have rulers.
Oh, you put that
Yeah.
Thank you.
With the mail.
You're going to send over.
I'm going to write on a pencil on it because
I wouldn't mind.
afterwards. afterwards.
Looking for the watermark on it. Why not? Maybe the Queen's head in it.
Quill with the cut. That Amalek has to be written before you can do any writing in the Torah. That's where you can cross out the enemy of Israel and blot it out for the children of Israel. Right now. I'm just going to write first for all of you peace. Okay, so let's sing out Shalom.
Shalom.
Now the letter, as I write, I'm supposed to sing. So, Shin. Everybody.
Shin.
That's good, because this way you do a blessing on yourself. That is one of those letters which has to have 3 points on the top. And use the corner of the pen. So you don't have to go to a small pen to write the fine line. And you do the center stroke. And bring it around like that. So you're not so fine line that way. And you do the same thing over like that. And then you bring this down, and as you bring it down, you go down and bring it back up again. So it's a double thickness like that. Lamed.
Lamed.
Good. That's beautiful. That's a real blessing upon yourself. I'm stretching this one out. Like the word, if you had a lot of space to fill, and so they have a little more stretched out. Brother.
Lots of optics, you see.
Mem
Sophie.
Whenever you do the ending letter, you say Sophie to remind yourself you're at the end of the word. Or you could say, Al Yisrael, maybe we'll say, peace on Israel. I don't have my tikkun. Rabbi, is Al Ayin Lamed or Aleph Lamed? Ayin. Ayin Lamed. Ayin.
Ayin.
I need a scholar to remind me all the time.
What direction is it?
Richard.
It's right, I'm getting it over.
We've got that pressed in line,
Is that how it's done?
and you learn to drop, as you say, from the top to do that. Okay, that's the iron. Lamed.
Lamed.
This is a shorter lamed because they're not trying to stretch it out, but rather make space to put Israel in. Lamed Sophie. You've all seen it, so it shouldn't be too difficult for you to do it yourself, right? If you cut the quill right, that makes a lot of difference too.
How long can you use a quill for before you change it?
Well, until you have to resharpen it, which
Yeah.
could be, you might use 3 or 4 quills to a Torah. A Megillah you can do with 1 quill. Yisrael Reish.
Israel Reish.
Now, because it's my letter for Ray, I put a little Olive.
Olive.
I'm writing like the Germans, so it's completely 90 degrees. Do you want me to make it like a Czechoslovakian? Make it above, or stay with it? I'll stay with the same writing as the other. Right.
Something like that, get into 100 years and get married.
They wouldn't know. Love and Sophie.
Love and Sophie.
So I'm stretching this one out, so it'll fit out to that side.
I suppose it's just practice and experience that makes you sort of start at the beginning and finish exactly at the end.
Well, you learn how to do it. It takes about 20 minutes for that to dry. Let's take, we're talking about pays. One form of the pay would be this form, which is like this. You make a sort of square and change it around like that, you see. This is what you said it did in the Czechoslovakian pay. Right, that's the one that you saw before, right? Then this is one from Poland. That comes down and changes from there, like that, like you saw with this last Torah. So the Polish teacher teaching this last scribe, that's that shape of the pay. This is one that was influenced by the Kabbalah and will do this form, but will change the inside of it so that the Sfirat are involved. And that is taking the corner of the pen and bringing it out. To do that, that's a Kabbalistic pay. And this is a pay which is in a country which has a Sephardic blend with the Ashkenazic, so you have a little diamond in it. And then that comes straight from the top and comes down like that. That has that admixture. So there are 4 different pays, and to give you some idea of the writing and of how it's formed. In each case, as you see, the pay is very large. Only in the Spanish and Portuguese tradition you sometimes see the pay the same size as the rest of the writing. Okay, so my wife reminded me it was getting late, so
I think we are getting late.
Yes. This, of course, is for you to hang on to, Rabbi.
Yeah. We'll hand it on to the teacher of class 6.
Right.
I think that would be...
And that's the pay.
That's wonderful.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Now, I guess I have to pack